Okay, so in setting up your men's blocks, I've traced over this one. I have drawn it in, and now I'm going to draw in my straight of grain. And the way you'd set up your blocks would be lining it along the hip line, but also making sure your two lines were parallel. So like I said, if I place this and make these parallel, they overlap slightly. So in this case, I'm going to extend out. So I'm going to extend out at the knee a little bit so I can see my knee and my hip line are matched up. So I'm going to extend here using the screen there. Right, then I can place this here along that line and this along this line, and I can then measure across and be sure that these two lines are parallel and I know these two are level. So it is the men's trouser block that we're working on. I know we're often working on women's wear, but the men's and the women's block of trousers are, you know, they're similar enough. There's differences in the darts. It's more darts in women's wear. But just in terms of learning the basics on drafting, it doesn't matter so much, you know, which block we start with. And the adaptations we're going to do are similar and can be applied to either men's or women's wear. So I'm just measuring here again. It doesn't matter the measurement I have, whether it's 34 or 36 or whatever, it just needs to be the same. So once these are parallel, I can then trace around it. Okay, that's the best way. Sometimes you'll see in Winifred's book that she will have them like this, you know, the back and the front, okay, because she doesn't necessarily always set them up that way, you know. So it's to be sure that you know that it isn't a rigid thing that you have to set up your blocks in this way, but I found, particularly when people are learning, that this is a good method because it leads to less mistakes. You're level this way and this way, and also because you've been used to the practice of always having the front on the right and the back on the left, that we just stick to this practice and then you make less mistakes. Okay? So here we go. This is a simple draft. The main purpose of looking at this was to introduce you to menswear, to introduce you to Winifred's menswear book, which I know a lot of you might not have. We're mainly doing women's wear, but this is the menswear book. In terms of the menswear book, the main difference is that she includes the seam allowance in there and the hem allowance. So in the block, the seam allowance is included. So it's important to understand that in our classroom, we don't include seam allowance in anything, and in the women's Winifred Aldrich book, there is no seam allowance included in her blocks. The block is the block. We do our adaptations, then we go on to the pattern where we add our seam and hem allowance. So it's different in the menswear book. So that is why it is more difficult. It's one of the reasons why it's more difficult to do menswear at this stage, because you're using the Winifred's book so that you have at least consistency in the type of instructions she gives and diagrams and everything. But all of a sudden, she's giving you all these extra layer of instructions about whether it has seam allowance or not. So if this block, this one doesn't have, but if it had seam allowance included, and I wanted to draw a seam down it and make it two panels, you know, and make one side red and one side blue, because I like that, you know, all of a sudden on my pattern I'd have to remember, okay, in the block there's seam allowance on this side, so I wouldn't be adding seam allowance on this side or here, because in the block that's all included. But the new line that I took and added, I'd have to add seam allowance to. Okay? Now that, in my experience from teaching at this level, confuses people like crazy. That's what it makes it harder. So you have an extra layer. Okay? Now because of that, I don't put seam allowance on my men's blocks, because you're used to not having seam allowance on the blocks, and we're used to making adaptations where we don't think about seam allowance at all. We do all our adaptations, we get to the end, then we put seam allowance everywhere that has a seam. Not like, oh, this is part of the block and that has a seam allowance, given this part isn't part of the block and I added it, and so then I have, you know what I mean? That's very hard for people to figure out. All right. So my blocks in the classroom, and when you're doing your patterns for, if you are doing menswear, that won't come up. So we just dabble in. We don't need to worry, hold it lightly. We're going to continue as we have.
Relax everyone, breathe.
We're going to continue as we have for all our other drafts, where we draft with a block without seam allowance, make our adaptations, and then add our seam allowance. It's just to warn you that her instructions are going to be slightly different, okay? And we're going to ignore all those bits. And this is just to let you know why we're ignoring those bits or what she's talking about, because that can just send people way off here for half an hour in the wrong direction. It's like once she starts talking about seam allowance in menswear, just, you know what I mean, we leave that out. So I'll read through her instructions, but maybe I'm just going to show you. This is quite a simple draft. I'll draft it quickly enough. It's more about the tracing off on this one. You know the way it's quite simple, the construction is quite simple. We do our 3 or 4 things, but then tracing off is really confusing. What are we doing here? And this is one of those instances. It's a basic trouser. We're not even going to draft the waistband. We're just going to draft the fly, front, and the pocket bag, which seems simple enough. It's only a few lines on our construction, but when we go to trace off, to understand all the pieces and how they go together and which one you're to trace off and to put your straight grains in is plenty of work for people. Okay, so yeah, and you see her symbol on the side. See the side that has kind of slanted lines? Mm-hmm. They're all the bits that she's added on, where she's added on seam allowance. Okay, so that's what they mean. So we just don't worry about it too much. So sometimes people obsess on the diagram. They're like, what is that? Do I need to do that? Like, kind of ignore those bits, because we're kind of operating in a different way to her. We're putting seam allowance all the way around. So she has just seam allowance on that side, because the block has seam allowance in it here, here, and here. But ours isn't like that. We don't have seam allowance anywhere, so we're going to put seam allowance all around that rather than just on the one side. So her instructions are pretty simple, I'd say. Front and side piece, she says trace off the front trouser block, draw in fly piece from front fork as shown, length 24 centimeters, so she gives you the length, width 5 centimeters. Excellent, we don't even have to worry about that. Our lengths and widths are given to us. She says mark point A on fitting line of side seam. Okay, that's how far in you're coming for the pocket. A to B is 5 centimeters. Oh no, A is where the seam allowance is. Yeah. And then A to B is how far you're coming in. So then draw a pocket line. Add the seam allowance, add the seam. We're going to ignore all that. Add the hem allowance. Kind of ignore those instructions. Then back, trace off back trouser block. Mark in point 25. 25 to D is 6 centimeters, so she's telling us how far down to come. Then the width of that line, which is for the pocket on the back of the trouser, is, she gives us 14 centimeters, and then she gives us how much hem allowance. We can also kind of ignore that. So we're probably kind of glossing over quite a lot of her instructions, all right? But I left them there, we can read it through, and then you can just kind of watch me do these things. Essentially what we're doing on this is we're adding a fly and we're adding a pocket. Simple enough, okay, in the drafting. So in terms of the fly, she's given us an amount to come down, and full scale is 24. Now remember, yours are quarter scale, so
it's not half.
It's not half, it's quarter scale on these trousers. So yeah, so we're coming down, you guys are coming down 6, I'm coming down 24. So just measure out a few times with your 5 and draw in your line. And remember that the fly, the shape at the bottom can be changed, it can be like made into an angle, or you know, you can...
So we're 1.25, yeah.
Yeah. So you're coming down 6 in quarter scale and 1.25. Okay, so full scale measurements in black, quarter scale measurements in red. So that's your fly. Like I said, you can change the shape. You can also change the width of flies. Sometimes in women's wear they're only narrow, they're 3 centimeters. Commonly they're 4, and they can be 4 on menswear as well. And they can be 5. So there's a range generally from about 3 to 5 centimeters. In terms of then the pocket line, you come in whatever amount you want there, And she, I think, gives us a 5 centimetre coming in. You can see on this trouser here, it's often about 4 or 5. That's 4. Okay, so if you come in just a little bit, if you put the pocket right on the very, very side seam, it's quite far back for a hand, so it's nice to come in a little bit. It sits a little bit easier for your hand to sit into the pocket. Okay, now you can come further in as well. You know, before 5 is maybe typical, but you can see like jeans pockets would be like, you know, coming like that, you know. So there's a lot of different ways you can draw a pocket. You can draw it whatever way you want, do you know? You can draw it like that. You can draw it like, do you know, curve. So how you draw in the pocket is a designer's choice. All right, and you can change it. You can change how far over you come, and you can change how far down you come, as long as the hand will fit in it if you're designing it for a hand to fit in, you know. The hands go in at an angle and they're wider than we think. So a lot of time you need to leave more space than you think, like 18 centimetres, 20 centimetres, okay? And people kind of often, when they're learning. Well, I think for women's, it's 14, and for men it's more like 16 or 18. So now it depends. Say a pocket at the back. There, it's not necessarily you're going to put your whole hand in and whatever. You know, it's kind of for putting a bit of your hand in and grabbing things out of and everything. And so that's 14 for men's. Okay, and sometimes it's smaller for women's, like even could be even 10. Okay, so in this case, how much you come out. So what you could do maybe is just, again, come out your 1.25 there. I'm coming out 5, and I'm drawing a line, and in this case I'm kind of coming down to the hip line. So then what you want is the pocket bag, which comes down and needs to fit the hand. Now it's a little high up for me, but usually I put my hand in there, you know, on the pattern, put it there just to be sure. I don't always measure, I just make the pocket big enough, do you know? But for this case, because everyone's doing it, we can, you know, measure over. So full scale, I've come over 8.
Come over 2.
So you come over 2, and then you would come down because, you know, when you put your hand in a pocket, you want to be able to have your hand go down. 12 does, doesn't it? So in quarter scale, that is 3, isn't it? So here is my pocket and my pocket bag, my fly, and the only other thing I'm going to really do on this would be a line for my pocket at the back, and she gives that, it's the center of the dart that we're coming from, and then we're coming down from that. We are squaring from that waistline, and we're coming down 6. Okay, so 6 full scale, 1.5 half scale, and then this is, she gives the width of 14 in full scale, or something close to that. So quarter scale would be
3.5.
Okay, that's not too bad. Kind of gone over the bits that we've done in red so they stand out as different to the block. Now that's mainly it for the construction, so it's quite simple to get these basic things on. Once you know them, you just draw on your fly, you decide where your pocket is, you know you want it deep, you know you want it wide, you just draw that on there. The tracing off and knowing which to trace off is the harder bit. Alright, there needs to be a straight grain in each piece, even then they're small. Okay, this line is not a straight grain, this is our straight grain, so we have to transfer that straight grain into there, and we have to be sure it's in through there as well. So that is the main practice of this one. trace all the pieces off. I'll trace them off and show you them. It does confuse people, okay? You need both the pocket itself, the pocket bag, so you need the pocket bag. There's two parts to the pocket bag. There's the bit that, like the palm of my hand is touching, and there's the bit that the back of my hand is touching. So there's two pattern pieces, one that's coming here hitting the back of my hand, one that's here hitting the palm of my hand. They're different, okay? The one that's hitting the back of my hand comes across this line, doesn't it? But the one that's hit the palm of my hand is coming all the way to here. So commonly people think this is somehow connected to the leg of the trouser, but it's not. It's only the pocket. It only goes down so deep as that. Do you know? This is a different piece, this piece here. Because in concept we think of that as part of the trouser. It's actually this little piece here.
So
It's just connected to there. Yeah. It's just connected to the, it's essentially the pocket bag. It's part of the pocket bag. So there's your fly piece. But you can see that it needs a grain line in it. You need some space around it because we're going to have to double one of these. So that's the pocket bag, the part that faces the back of my hand. And then, if I move my paper, and I'm going to trace the pocket bag that faces the palm of my hand. And this, where the pocket hits, is a notch point. And then you want your green line in there. If that is from here, and this piece is also from there, so there is my pocket bag. I have the top, the front, and the back of it. So now my hand can go into this pocket here, in between these two. Okay, and that's all behind the trouser leg. So I also need the full trouser leg. Okay, I need to trace that piece. Then these are in behind the trouser leg, both of these. They're sitting freely. Okay, so they each need their grain, they need their labeling. I'll get to that, but just so that you know, you're tracing those two. And then the last thing to explain then is the fly also needs two pieces, which can confuse people. So you have the fly here, this bit here is actually part of the trouser. There is a piece that comes, so on the menswear on the left hand side, that comes back. Do you see this bit here? It has blue bias binding on it. It's the fly facing, so it's facing the trouser, it's edging that side, right? And it's the same shape, so when I sew here, it catches there. And that's what the single fly is. But there is also a second, what's called a fly shield. So the piece that goes on the other side, see this side here? That's an important piece. That's the shield so the zip doesn't hit your skin. And it's the same shape as the fly, but it's doubled because it comes this way and then it folds back on itself. All right? So that's why you have, as you can see in her diagram as well, she has it, one that looks like that. You see? That's the fly shield. So the way to get that, you do one, single one, and then let's see if I have enough space here. The second one you need to fold over, and you can trace through with your tracing wheel, or if you can.
So that's on the fold.
It's not on. We wouldn't put it on the fold.
Okay.
But we would fold it to create it. I have two sides of a trouser, don't I? So I need this one and this one, because this is going to sew to the back of the trouser. So this is the trouser leg, that's the back of it there, this piece. All right. And then this is the shield that's coming out, do you know, from here, for the other side of the trouser. Okay, so just to recap for your final, wrap up a review, this is your construction, and you will have this one piece with just these marks. There's no second construction, and then you have the trace off of the front leg. Don't forget to draw in your straighter grain and your fly shaping on it. Also, you need your labelling. I haven't drawn it here, but be sure and put your labelling in on this piece. And then you have your back piece traced all the way around. Draw in your pocket line. If you want to write pocket on there or something like that, you can to help. Don't forget your hip notch. I need to put one there. Straighter grain. And then you have your small pieces. The pocket bag, I'm calling this piece from here. And the pocket facing is here. Okay? Typically, professionally, what they would divide these pieces. There'd be like a sort of a line here, and there would be two pieces. One would be the fabric from the garment, and the rest would be in the lining. All right? It's a little bit of a push for us, so we're just going to get these two pieces, and that's enough for us today. And then your fly facing and your fly shield. Okay, and put your labelling. Like I said, it might not fit on the piece, might be a bit too small, but near it. Okay, so just notice that I have straighter grains in all these, and labelling and the notches. All right, so it's up to you to do all of this.